Hi. So I usually dance out the speeches to describe them in class. And the best place I think to do this is my kitchen. So that's why this video looks a little different. We're going to do this in my kitchen. Okay, so first of all, what I'm asking you to do in this class is a little bit like juggling monkeys. It's not something that's ever going to happen to you. Nobody's ever going to come up to you and say, "Hi, I'd like you to give a speech next week. Here's a description and a time and a purpose, and I'm grading you." Like, no one's ever going to do that. So, like, just to be clear, we're doing something bizarre in this class, but we're trying to do it to teach you the skills. Okay? So, I have created 3 speeches that all connect. And the reason that I have them all connect is not to make your life hard. In fact, it's to make your life easier. Because I'm thinking that if we, you know, connect all the speeches throughout the class, you don't have to start over every time. So you're not doing 3 separate speeches where it's like, I have to find a topic, I have to do the research, and then craft it, and then blah, blah, blah. I have to find a new topic, I have to do the research, There's definitely benefits in doing that, but this is the idea of, like, if you find a general topic and then you maneuver the pieces, the scope, the purpose, the thesis for each individual speech, but they still connect, it's going to lighten your workload, and you're going to get a better, more developed speech at the end, because you will have all this background, right? Whereas if you're getting here and you're starting over again, it's not going to be as in-depth. So that's what I'm trying to give you. Now, as we talk about this, keep in mind, these connections between the speeches, they can be really tightly connected and very, very similar, or they can be really, really loose. And I'll try to give some examples of that later, okay? So if we're thinking about the first speech is an informative on a community concern. And remember, informative is all about giving information. So you're not telling people what to do. You're not demanding people do something. You're like, hey, I found this. Look, I found this. Look at what I found. The minute you're like, I found this, and it's a good idea. Phew. See how your hands come down? Nope. You got to keep your hands up. Hands up. Hey, I found this. This is a good idea. You can do with it what you want. And I'm not telling you how I feel about it. I just found it. Okay? Whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, I just found it. Now, here's a bunch of research, but I just found it. The other thing about informative is you don't want to only find some research. So you can't be like, I found some research. Don't look over here. No, don't look over here. You have to show them all the research, right? And you have to say, look, I found all this research. Here's what I found. Okay? Community concern, you're thinking about what community it's in, right? Whether it's in Milwaukee, in Wisconsin, in another country, whether it's in a family, whether it's in a group like the LGBTQ community. There's different ways to think about community, and there's different ways to think about concerns, right? So the idea is you're setting up this community concern. What's another word for community concern? Problem. Problem. This is the problem. We have a problem, right? Community concern. And we're not saying what we should do about the problem. We're not telling us how to feel about the problem. We're just saying, look, this is a problem, y'all. This is a community concern. And it's not just a community concern to me. Here's some other people that say it's a community concern. Informative. Okay, that's speech 1. I believe 3 to 5 minutes. Double check the speech description sheet. It'll tell you all the details. And it even gives you some nice information about informative. I had a little shot yesterday, and so it's a little sore. Rub, rub. Okay, so once we give that first speech, the second speech is part informative, part persuasive, because we're trying to bridge the gaps here. And I find that people have a hard time distinguishing. So I try to put them together so that you can kind of see how they're different and then how they connect. Because true informative a lot of people don't believe it exists. They believe that there's usually some type of like bias or influence, but that the difference is in one spot we really try to give information, and in the other spot, all the way over here, we're trying to persuade, right? We're trying to convince. More on that later. So the second speech is both. And the second speech connects to policy. So whatever your community concern was, you're going to find a policy that connects. And if you have trouble doing that, I will be able to help. Now, why a policy? Ms. O, why a policy? Why can't I just talk? Why do I have to link it to a law? Ms. O. Couple of reasons. One, this is going to blow your mind. Get ready. Policies are how we create reality. Think about it. Think about all the things you know to do and why you do them. It's usually because some sort of rule or policy. Or a norm, which we'll talk about later. We'll talk about the differences between policy and norms. But we're thinking about things that are grounded into reality. Here's a great example. So I just wrote a whole dissertation on sexual violence. And we all know that rape is illegal, right? You cannot rape another person, which is defined a bunch of different ways, and that gets messy. But for this purpose, let's say you cannot forcibly have sex with another person. When did that become a law? Anybody know? 1960s is when we, 1950s and 60s is when we started getting rape laws. Before that, it wasn't a law, which means it couldn't be prosecuted, which means when the behavior happened, we didn't do anything about it, or we did, but it wasn't sanctified by the community, right? And then for a long time, when we did make rape laws, they were very specific, and they usually involved a man raping a woman. So by law, a woman couldn't rape another woman, or a man couldn't rape another man, right? So we have this idea of how policy impacts reality. So you're going to set up this community concern, right, in the first speech. And then in the second speech, you're going to find a policy that connects, like what is making this reality. And then you're going to take a stance on the policy. That's the persuasive part. So the informative part is where you inform me about the policy and how it connects to the community concern. And then the persuasive part is where you say, this needs to be enforced more, or this is a terrible policy, or this is a great policy, we need to institute it in all the states. Okay? Then the third speech is an action speech. What do we do about all this? How can we make change? That's the whole point if there's a problem, right? How do we make change? That's the whole point of persuasion. What's the change to be made? So you set up the community concern, you told me about a policy that connects, and now you're telling me like what changes need to be made to fix this community concern and impact potentially these legal policies. This third speech is an action speech, and it should be focused on the audience, but also like the audience as connected to larger things, right? So these are the three speeches that we're doing. We're also going to do a mini speech, which is separate, and you'll also be introducing yourself next week, which is also separate. So these are the three big speeches we're doing, and they are all described on the speech description sheet, and this is me dancing them out to help them make sense. Now, some of these are going to be really connected, right? If I'm doing racial discrimination in Milwaukee, my community is pretty simple, Milwaukee. I might connect them to larger Wisconsin, but for the most part, Milwaukee. And my community concern is racial segregation, right? Let's say racial segregation. There are tons of laws that connect to racial segregation. I think the most obvious are the Red Line laws. So the history of the Red Line laws, how those were set up, and how those still influence the community today, right? And that would be my second speech. And then I would give a stance on those Red Line laws and how they impact our current community concern. And then I would give an action speech. What can we do about the racial discrimination in Milwaukee, right? So those are really connected. Did you see how, really, in many ways, this is like a large 15 to 20 minute speech spread out over a few weeks in three different parts. Now, I've had other people do things where, so this student one time started and he was talking about health, and he was really interested in specifically talking about uh, men in health. Um, and uh, his first speech was all about vitamin D and how specifically male bodies don't get enough vitamin D. And when he got to the second speech, it was the summer that they were debating the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, excuse me. And what he really wanted to do was talk about the Affordable Care Act, but he felt like it didn't connect well enough. So he kind of tried to like shove it in and talk a little bit about vitamins and also about healthcare, and it was kind of messy. And afterwards I said, why didn't you just talk about the Affordable Care Act? And he said, because I said, that's what you wanted to talk about. He said, yeah, but I felt like it was too far away from my first speech. And I said, that's just to guide you, right? That's just to help you connect. If you kind of discover along the way that you're like figuring out different topics or that are connected to your original community concern, that's completely fine. What I would not recommend doing is switching completely, right? Sometimes people do that, but I would recommend spending a fair amount of time selecting this first idea, thinking about these future speeches, so that you have, a basis and a place to go. You don't have to fully understand these next two speeches to kind of get a good topic that does all of these things. Now, obviously, if you get done with the first speech and you're like, I have nowhere to go, this sucks, or I hate everything, I'm not going to stop you. It's just if you keep changing, it won't be as like developed and we won't get what we want when we get to this third speech. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you have any questions on the speeches, you can either email me or you can put them in the questions discussion board, and then I can always answer. Have a beautiful day.